Hamas says that 5 of their senior commanders were recently killed, and Israel highlights their war dogs going to work in Gaza. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 7:30 a.m. Central on Sunday, November 26th, 2023. The ceasefire is still in effect across Gaza, day 2 of 4 complete. Over the past 24 hours, 17 hostages were released by Hamas. That included 13 Israelis and 4 Thai citizens. Of that group, 7 of those were under the age of 16. Israel then released another 39 Palestinians being held in Israeli jails for a variety of offenses. Now, big picture here, the overall plan for the ceasefire is 50 hostages held by Hamas to be released in exchange for 150 Palestinians. The 4-day truce could be extended for 1 day for every 10 additional hostages released by Hamas. It's not clear right now if that extra day for 10 hostages is going to end up being utilized. Now, technically, the ceasefire is still going according to plan, but yesterday Hamas accused Israel of violating the ceasefire by not allowing aid trucks into northern Gaza and said that they would delay the next release of hostages, but eventually that was all sorted out. Now, the UN earlier today confirmed that aid is entering northern Gaza, saying that 11 ambulances, 3 coaches, and a flatbed were delivered to Shifa Hospital to help with evacuations, adding that another 200 trucks were dispatched to Gaza, including at least 129,000 liters of fuel. Now, during the ceasefire, civilians are able to transit the battlefield to a degree. So a major concern for Israel right now is that Palestinian civilians will move back north into some of these areas that have already been evacuated. It sounds like Israel's kind of shutting that down, not allowing civilians to move from south to north, but they are permitting folks to move from north to south. You know, there's still a lot of major military operations that take place in and around Gaza City, and Israel wants as few civilians there as possible. And the challenge right now is that, yes, technically there are 2 more days remaining in this ceasefire, but this is something that could unravel at any moment. Whether something actually happens between the 2 sides that is deemed a violation of the ceasefire, or just the perception of that, and the fighting intensifies, it's very, very risky for civilians to move back into these combat zones, assuming that ceasefire is going to remain in place for another 48 hours. Then over the past 24 hours, Hamas confirmed the death of 5 senior commanders in their ranks that were killed by Israeli airstrikes prior to the ceasefire going into effect. So it's not clear if they were killed weeks ago and this information is just now coming out, or if it was just in the days leading up to the ceasefire and their bodies were only recently recovered. So moving through these, we've got Preston Khalifa, a member of the West Bank headquarters of Hamas, Ayman Siyam, who is responsible for the rocket forces within Hamas, Wael Rajab, the deputy commander of the Northern Division of the Gaza Strip, Rafat Salman, the deputy commander of the Gaza City Brigade, and the most notable death so far announced by Hamas since the ongoing operations, considered one of the top 3 to 5 military commanders in Gaza at this point, Ahmed Ahandor, the commander of the Northern Gaza Brigade of Hamas. Now, Israel put out some information about some of their working dog teams going to work in Gaza, and this is an area of warfare where Israel is far and away the leading practitioner around the world when it comes to the training and the use of dogs on the battlefield. I mean, the very first dog that I ever worked with in Afghanistan, we had a Marine handler, but it was an Israeli dog, born and trained in Israel. He was awesome. But anyways, Israel put out some information here showing just how the dogs have been used so far in Gaza. I do think a lot of people at times, they see these dogs, they can be mean looking at times, and people think that maybe they're used to attack enemy forces. Technically, some dogs can be trained to do that, but for the most part, they're using their nose. So the dogs here that Israel highlights were used to identify booby traps, usually with explosives, to find weapons and other ammunition stored in various areas in Gaza, when needed to root out enemy fighters from hidden locations, and at times they're able to help locate hostages or even the bodies of fallen Israelis. Now, Israel says that since the fighting has kicked off, since the ground operation has kicked off in Gaza, 4 Israeli working dogs have fallen in the line of duty. I'll put their pictures up here as Israel released them. You've got Mido, Taiga, Jack, and Gandhi. They say these 4 dogs will be returned to Israel for a proper military burial ceremony. Then Israel kicked off more operations in the West Bank in which they say 5 terrorists were killed and 21 arrested. They say that the raid into Jenin resulted in a firefight where, after the elimination of the enemy fighters, they uncovered ammunition stockpiles, explosives, and a drone. And if you see the bionic hand seized in the picture here, I don't know what that is. No idea. They added that since October 7th, Israel has arrested around 2,000 Palestinians in the West Bank, of which they say 1,100 are affiliated with Hamas. Now, in past events, Hamas has claimed responsibility for these attacks or firefights or the loss of their fighters in the West Bank, because Hamas does have a presence in the West Bank. They refer to them as their West Bank brigades. But this time, it came from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a different group than Hamas, very closely associated with Hamas, but a different organization. PIJ did take part in the October 7th massacre, and they are currently fighting Israeli forces in Gaza, or not now with the ceasefire, but before the ceasefire and after the ceasefire. They'll get back to it. When you think of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, similar to Hamas in a lot of ways, just remove all of the governance aspects. So PIJ is like a purely militaristic organization and a little more extreme than Hamas in a handful of ways. Now, the Iranian proxies are just all over the map right now. Not literally, both. Well, literally and figuratively. It's hard to dial in exactly what they're doing. So we have this current ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Those are the two parties involved in the ceasefire, right? Hamas, Israel. But Hezbollah early on said that, hey, maybe we'd like to be a part of this. And so long as Israel doesn't attack us, maybe we won't attack them, kind of thing. And it's kind of been in effect there. There was a tit for tat yesterday, but for the most part, the attacks on the northern front are way, way down. I haven't really seen anything now in the past 24 hours. And then Hezbollah brigades, which this is going to get confusing. So Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, trained and equipped and funded through Iran. And they grew so large and have so much power that now Hezbollah has their own proxies. So the Hezbollah brigades are proxies of an Iranian proxy, and they're scattered all across Iraq and Syria. The Hezbollah brigades have been responsible at times for attacks on U.S. forces, as well as some attacks from Syrian territory into Israel. In fact, the most recent U.S. strike, that AC-130 gunship response, was against a Hezbollah brigade element that killed 8 of their fighters. So the Hezbollah brigades put out the other day that they would announce a reduction in the pace of escalation of operations against American occupation bases in the region and a halt to attacks against the Zionist entity until the end of the truce period. So Hezbollah brigade says they're going to reduce the number of attacks against American forces and stop attacking Israeli forces. So they're kind of half, maybe, getting in on the ceasefire. But then the Houthis, another Iranian proxy, this one down in Yemen, apparently want nothing to do with this ceasefire at all. So yesterday they launched a drone at southern Israel that was intercepted by Israeli forces over the Red Sea. And then there's early reports coming out right now that an Israeli-owned tanker was seized off the coast of Yemen. And I guess the responsible thing to do right now is to say the Houthis haven't claimed responsibility for that, and it technically could be anybody. But if it's off the coast of Yemen, after the Yemeni-based Houthis have already seized another ship and have said that they're going to continue to seize Israeli ships, look, if the ship was seized, it was probably the Houthis. But we'll wait for confirmation. The Houthis also put out a couple pictures here showing pretty significant pro-Palestinian rallies happening in their capital city of Sana'a. Look, if that is organic, if that is true, if that is how the people in Yemen, at least under Houthi rule, feel about this conflict, you can see why they're going to keep doing whatever they can to attack Israel or Israeli assets around the region. It's good for their image. It's good for their grip on power. It's, at this point, there's no indication that the Houthi involvement in this war is going to slow at all. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that a ceasefire is surrender to Hamas, and that's not going to happen. In a recent piece he penned for the Jerusalem Post, he said, quote, "I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen." So I can understand the confusion of how is a ceasefire surrendering? How does that make sense? So one of the arguments from early on, on October 7th and shortly thereafter, was that part of Hamas's plan here, and always, is that Israel will not have the international support, will not have the time to be able to go in to Gaza for a long-term, large-scale operation like we're seeing right now. That could eventually end up with the Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip, to where Hamas has no place to operate. So the argument that Netanyahu is putting forward here is that giving Hamas that space to breathe, to survive in Gaza, is essentially surrendering to what happened on October 7th. Then he continues saying, I hope and pray that civilized nations everywhere will back this fight because Israel's fight is your fight. Because if Hamas and Iran's axis of evil win, you will be their next target. That's why Israel's victory will be your victory. But make no mistake, regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won, and Israel will prevail. So a couple thoughts here. The first is that it's not crazy for any country at war to want to say, hey, we're not just doing this for us, we're doing this for you all. This is your fight. Be on our side. We saw this a lot recently over the past couple of years in Ukraine. Think of how many times you've heard that Ukraine is on the forefront, defending democracy, defending the world-based order. And if Ukraine falls, then it's going to be, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe, so on and so forth. So again, not crazy to see that type of language being used. Again, understandable from Netanyahu's perspective. I've wondered a lot recently if there's any amount of international pressure that could make Israel stop this war before they feel like they have accomplished their objectives. Because that's been a thing in the past, negotiated settlements, ceasefires, so on and so forth. I don't think that's in the cards right now, or at least we're nowhere near it. And there has been a lot of international pressure mounting, but Netanyahu kind of takes this head on here where he says, regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won. There is pressure mounting from a lot of different directions, but I haven't really seen any indication that Israel is considering a long-term ceasefire here. They are full steam ahead in a lot of ways. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. Substack now also has ad-free, sponsor-free videos that go live about 1 hour before they go up on YouTube. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.